Hello, and welcome to Apollo Sky's podfics. I'm Apollo, and this is Changling Families by LittleLadyBaker, chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7, Aaarrrgghh. Lenora ruffled her sheet music as she entered the music classroom. "This is it, Lenora," she told herself. "You can do it. Just go in there and ask him." Among the faculty at Arcadia Oaks High School, few were on first-name basis. Everyone called Lawrence by his first name, if only because it was easier than trying to pronounce his last name. No one was on first-name basis with Uhl, and obviously Strickler and Otto were on first-name basis. They were brothers, after all. But there was only one person who could get away with calling her Lenora, and that person was Herr Otto Aaarrrgghh. Their co-workers had been astonished when the reclusive theater director/math teacher and the bubbly German music teacher had become fast friends. But then again, Otto was very good at making friends. "Otto?" she asked as she handed him the sheet music for the next play. "Will you and your little bear be attending Councilwoman Nunez's cookout tomorrow? I hear everyone is bringing their children. I even got my sister to let me bring my nephew, Elijah." "We may," Otto replied, "but we may not be able to stay very long. I take Toby to see his Nana every Freitag. She is his Bertzvater's Mutter." "Oh." Lenora tried not to sound disappointed. "I see." Otto smiled gently up at her. "Would you and Eli like to join us? Nana says we may bring friends." Lenora was surprised by the offer. "I'd like that. I'll ask my sister if it's all right to bring Eli." Otto grinned, gold tooth catching the light. "Wunderbar! I look forward to seeing you then, mein Freundin." "Freundin." Lenora rolled the word around in her mind. "Friend." Otto zipped up Toby's to-go bag and leaned into the living room to check on his son. The now 3-year-old had finished putting away the last of his toys and was now looking at the CDs for one to play in the car. "Bist du bereit für den Schuh, Bärchen?" "Ja, Papa." Toby grabbed his favorite CD and ran to Otto. Otto lifted Toby and swung him over his head. The little boy shrieked with laughter and hugged his papa around the neck. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. "That must be the Nora und Elijah," Otto said, switching to English and moving Toby to his hip. "Are you ready to meet them, Bärchen?" Toby didn't reply. Otto wasn't surprised. He knew his son still wasn't too keen on meeting new people. He was only ever out going around his new cousin. Otto opened the door and found Lenora sitting on the stoop with an absolutely tiny boy on her hip. "Guten Tag, Lenora," Otto greeted. "Und you must be Eli." "Elijah," Lenora corrected. "My sister doesn't like when I call him Eli." "Do you like being called Elijah, mein Jung?" Otto addressed the boy. "Toby prefers to be called Toby rather than Tobias." Elijah shook his head. "I like Eli. Elijah is real long." Otto smiled. "All right then, Eli it is." He then whispered to Lenora, "What your sister doesn't know won't hurt her." Lenora smiled back and tried not to laugh. "Oh, I'm sorry, Toby. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lenora Janeth. I work with your papa and Uncle Walt." Toby waved. "Well, since we are all here, let's get the Jungen into the car and head over to the party." Lenora retrieved Eli's rear-facing car seat from her car, and they quickly had the boys strapped into the car. Otto seized the opportunity alone to ask Lenora a serious question about her nephew. "Lenora, how old is Eli?" "He's 3 years old," Lenora insisted. Eli was a micropreemie. He was born 3 weeks early and spent the first month and a half of his life in an incubator. That's why his mother is so overprotective of him. She's going to be picking him up from the party, because she doesn't want him going to Nana's." Otto nodded. "I understand, Lenora. Danke for letting me know." They got into the car, and soon all 4 of them were ready to go. "Bärchen, can you give Lenora your CD so we can listen to it on the way?" Otto addressed his son. Toby shyly held out his CD for the woman. It was one of Otto's mixed CDs. He had made this one after he adopted the boy, and it had both German and English children's songs on it. It didn't take long for Toby and Eli to start singing along, even if Eli didn't know the words to the German songs. The Stricklers were already at the party when the 4 arrived. "Otto, Miss Janeth, I was beginning to wonder what was taking you two so long," Walt said as they walked in. "All the kids are in the back," Barbara explained. "I think Uhl, Lawrence, and Javier have set the kiddie pool and hose to make a water slide for the little ones." Lenora shook her head. "Miranda didn't send any spare clothes with Eli. No water slide for you, sweetie." Eli pouted, but nodded. The tiny boy took Toby by the hand, and they headed out to the backyard under the watchful eyes of Otto and Lenora. Toby perked up when he saw Jim with the other children. Only then did Otto allow himself to relax and join the other adults. "It is Toby's first time in a large group of children," he explained to Lenora and Ophelia, who had approached with her. "I was just a little anxious about how he would act." "Well, he can't be any worse than Mary and Lawrence's boy," Ophelia insisted. "Are you kidding me? He's at it again." Out in the yard, Lawrence had pulled a young blonde boy to the side. A blonde woman, Mary, stood nearby with her arms crossed. They both were talking sternly to Steve. Otto and Lenora couldn't hear what they were saying, but soon Steve was wrapped in a warm hug from both the adults. Steve then ran back to the rest of the kids and rejoined the fun. "That boy hasn't stopped picking on the other children since he got here," Ophelia complained. "Let's hope that whatever Lawrence and Mary said this time does the trick." Otto and Lenora exchanged a nervous glance. The party continued without a hitch for the next several hours. Then Nomura arrived. "Does this munchkin belong to anyone at this party?" She had a little Japanese girl holding her hands and walking on her feet. "I found her in the front yard." "What's your name, cutie?" Barbara knelt in front of the girl. "Mary Wong," she replied. Ophelia and Javier searched the party for anyone with the name Wong. They couldn't find anyone. Walt flipped out his phone and called the police department's non-emergency line. "Hello, I'm at the Nunez party, and we have a little girl whose parents are missing. She was found in the front yard, and her parents are not at the party. Mary Wong. Mary, can you tell me how old you are?" "I'm 3 years old," Mary answered proudly, holding up 3 of her tiny fingers. "She's 3 years old. She's got black hair and brown eyes." Yes. Okay, thank you." They're sending an officer over to assess the situation and probably take Mary back to the station until they find her parents. Barbara took Mary to the backyard to play with the other children. She soon joined Eli in the inflatable ball pit. Barbara and Lenora sat monitoring the children to keep them from getting hurt. Eventually, a tall, dark-skinned officer arrived at the party, holding hands with a little girl. "Officer Scott?" Walt gasped. "Walt Strickler," the officer replied. "You two know each other?" Lenora asked. "We do. To make a long story short, he helped Barbara and I out the day Jim was born." "Hello, everyone. I'm Officer Scott, and this is my daughter, Darcy. It's Bring Your Kid to Work Day. Now, where's Mary?" "She's out back with the other kids," Ophelia explained. "She doesn't seem to realize anything is wrong." Officer Scott and Darcy followed her to the backyard, but stiffened as soon as he saw Mary. "Darcy, why don't you go play? Just stay out of the water, okay, princess?" he told his daughter. "Okay, Daddy," Darcy said before running off to play. "Is something wrong, Officer Scott?" Barbara asked. "I know where Mary's parents are," the officer whispered. "Their car collided with a tree down the road." "Are they all right?" Barbara's doctor instincts kicked in. Officer Scott shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Neither of them made it to the hospital." "How did Mary get down here?" Lenora whispered. "Why is Mary unharmed?" Otto questioned. "We don't know," Scott insisted. "We didn't even know that Mary existed until you called." "What will happen to her now?" Lenora asked. "She'll go to the station until we're able to locate her next of kin. If we can't find anyone, then she'll be put into foster care," Scott explained quietly. "I could take her." The other 3 turned and stared at Otto. "What? I'm a registered foster parent," Otto explained. "I will happily take her in." "I'll make a few calls," Officer Scott nodded. "I'll see if she can stay here until they know, and in the case that we can't find any family, we can get everything worked out for you to take her home, Mr. Aaarrrgghh." Otto held out his hand for a handshake. "My name is Otto Aaarrrgghh." Officer Scott shook his hand and then returned to Ophelia. "Would it be all right with you if I left Darcy playing with the other kids while I make these calls?" "I don't see why not," Ophelia replied. While Scott went outside, Lenora and Otto kept an eye on the playing children. All the children were quick to accept Darcy as one of their own, just as they had when Mary had joined the party. Claire and Mary in particular seemed to bond with the girl the most. Toby mostly stayed close to Jim, and the 2 were often close to the 3 girls. To everyone's surprise, Steve had changed his tune completely and was doing everything he could to protect Eli. It was actually really cute. Suddenly, Barbara materialized next to Otto. "Walt wants a word with you," she informed him. "I'll help Lenora keep an eye on the kids till you get back." Otto nodded and headed into the house to find his brother. Walt was standing next to a window facing the backyard. "What is it, Walt?" "There's something about Mary that caught my eye," Walt explained, "and I know you noticed something is different about her, too." "What do you smell, Bruderlein?" Otto knew exactly what his brother was talking about. She is not human. Well, she's not a changeling. I don't think she's a polymorph either. 9. She is not a changeling. She smells like Wasser, like ein Fisch. Otto, are you implying what I think you're implying? I do not think she is a siren. She would have everyone here wrapped if she was. Nor is she a Zelki. She has no pelt. Okay, you've lost me. She can't possibly be a mermaid. She's got legs. Not a Scandinavian mermaid or a Greek mermaid, and she's clearly not an Irish or Scottish mermaid. She's too pretty. But mermaids of the Pacific, of Japan and Australia, have legs when they are dry. You can see that she is avoiding the Wasser, and she won't hug any of the kinders that are wet. She's holding hands with Claire right now, and Claire has been on the water slide all day. Damp is not wet. So, did you offer to take her in just to keep an eye on her? 9. I mean what I said. I will be happy to take Mary in. Her and Toby get along, and she is a very sweet girl. Walt smiled proudly at his little brother and nodded. Well then, you have my support. And, if you ever need a babysitter, I doubt Barbara would complain if I offered our assistance. Danke, Walt. All right, Mr. Scarbach. Officer Scott approached the two brothers. I've got the paperwork, but I'll be needing to see your paperwork in order for you to take Mary home. If we can't find any family, that is. Of course, officer. Otto followed Officer Scott out to his car and pulled his own paperwork out of his glove box. Before they had even finished exchanging the paperwork, Officer Scott got a call from the station. Officer Scott here. Yes. Yes. We were just working out the paperwork. No. Are you sure? You haven't been looking for that long. Wow. Okay. Okay. I'll let them know. Yes, thank you. He turned to Otto. You'll be taking Mary home. Both of her parents had no siblings, and her grandparents all passed in the past 10 years. Only one was even still living when Mary was born. Otto nodded. All right. Thank you for letting me know, Officer Scott. Otto looked in the rearview mirror and smiled. Toby and Mary were babbling animatedly to each other. Otto turned his eyes over to Lenora. She had wound up arguing with her sister when the other woman arrived to pick up Eli. Lenora caught his eye and offered a small smile. Eyes on the road, Otto. The polymorph blushed, turning his eyes back to the road. It wasn't long before they pulled into the parking lot of Nana's apartment building. Otto got out and lifted Toby out of his car seat while Lenora gathered Mary from hers. Otto led the way up to Nana's apartment and knocked on the door. There you two are, the old woman said as she opened the door, leaning on her cane. Oh, who's this? Nana, this is Mary Wang and Lenora Janez, Otto explained, stumbling a bit over the last names. Mary will be staying with Toby and I for a while, and Lenora is mein Freundin from work. Nana looked Lenora up and down before letting everyone in. Well, it's wonderful to meet you both. Any friend of Otto and Toby Pie is a friend of mine. Otto settled the two toddlers on the floor with a few toys from Toby's bag before heading into the kitchen to help Nana and Lenora with dinner. Oh, I think Lenora and I have this part covered, Otto, Nana said. Why don't you go set the table? All right, Nana. After he left the kitchen, Nana returned to Lenora. I still have to wonder if he quite knows what he's gotten himself into, the older woman said to the younger. What do you mean? Lenora asked, looking away from the mushrooms she was cutting. Well, he's just one man, after all, Nana continued. With two little ones, Otto's going to be needing some help. His brother and sister are always offering to watch Toby while Otto works on the play with me, Lenora explained, and I've offered my assistance a few times. But does he know anything about taking care of little girls? He knows he can ask me if he needs any help with little girls. I like Otto, and I care about Toby and Mary, too. That's good to hear, dearie, Nana smiled. That's good to hear. Toby and Mary both fell asleep on the way back to the Scarbach house. Otto carried Toby into the house, and Lenora carried Mary. After Otto got his son into his pajamas and Mary was carefully dressed in one of Otto's old t-shirts, both the toddlers were tucked into Toby's bed. Somehow, both children slept through it all. With the little ones taken care of, Otto walked Lenora to the door. I had a great time today, Otto, Lenora told him, even with the few unexpected surprises. I did too, Otto agreed. Perhaps we could do it again sometime, just the two of us. Lenora blushed and smiled. I'd like that. Does Tuesday work for you? Yeah, that works for me if it works for you. Lenora smiled and kissed Otto on the cheek. Then I'll see you at work on Monday. Otto's eyes were wide behind his glasses. I'll see you on Monday. Lenora happily ambled up the front walk to her boyfriend's house. They had decided to include Toby and Mary on this date and, rather than going out, had planned an at-home date. Dinner, a movie with the kids, put Toby and Mary to bed, then watch whatever suited their fancy. When the door opened, she was greeted by a very frazzled Otto. He had his phone in one hand, a sobbing Mary in the other. Toby was curled up on the sofa with their cat, Fragua. "Lenora, oh, I completely forgot." He pressed his phone to his temple and shook his head. I'm afraid we'll have to postpone... I'm afraid we'll have to postpone our date for tonight." "Why? What happened?" Lenora gently rubbed Mary's back. "Barbara was hit by a drunk driver," Otto explained. "Jim was in the car with her, and Walt wants me to come pick him up from the hospital. I can't take all 3 of the children in the car." Mary started screaming because she overheard what happened. Toby isn't talking, and on top of it all, Nana isn't answering her phone, so I have no one to watch Toby and Mary. "I'll watch them," Lenora offered. "I'll take care of Mary and Toby. You go get Jim." Otto shook his head. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask." Lenora took Mary from Otto. "It's not much different from what we had planned. Go, get Jim, and make sure Barbara's all right. Our plans can change. Go." Otto stared at her for a moment before turning, grabbing his coat and keys, and kissing her on the cheek. "Dinner is in the oven. DVD is on the TV. I'll be back as soon as I can." "All right, go." Otto ran out the door and drove off. Lenora sighed and began rocking Mary. She toed off her shoes and slipped on her house shoes. Sitting on the sofa, she pulled Toby over to her side. "Shh, shh, shh. It's all right, Mary. Alles okay," Lenora whispered into Mary's hair. "Why are you crying? Do you want to talk about it?" "Tante Barbara's going to go away just like Mommy and Daddy," Mary wailed. Lenora felt her heart shatter. "Oh, baby. Shh, shh, shh. Tante Barbara's not going anywhere. She'll be just fine and home soon. And until then, Jim's going to come here and we're going to play. Okay, baby girl, baby bear." "Tante Barbara's going to be okay?" Toby signed, uncertainly. Lenora nodded and stroked his hair. "I promise. Now, are you hungry? Do you want to eat what Papa made for us?" Toby and Mary nodded, smiles spreading over their faces. Lenora pulled out a handkerchief and wiped Mary's face before picking up both 4-year-olds and dancing into the kitchen. Fragua scuttled along behind them. She plopped them down at the table and pulled the shepherd's pie out of the oven. Grinning, she spooned it into bowls for the children. Clang! Lenora jumped when the plastic dish labeled Fragua landed on the counter. The odd green cat landed next to it and grinned up at her. After a moment of hesitation, Lenora shrugged and spooned out food for Fragua. She could have sworn she heard Fragua say, "Thank you." Lenora set the food at the table. "Danke," Mary and Toby chorused. "Bitte." Lenora chuckled as she got her own food and sat at the table with them. Fragua could be heard slurping up his food, while Toby and Mary were too preoccupied with their own food to even talk to each other. When they finished eating, the toddlers took their bowls and put them in the sink. Then Mary grabbed a towel, and Toby hopped up on a chair. They both turned to look at Lenora. "We always help Papa with the dishes after dinner," Toby sighed. "I know." Lenora swallowed her last mouthful of food. "Remember the last time I came over?" She got up and put the rest of the food in the fridge and went over to the sink and washed the pan and the bowls before handing them to Mary, who dried them and handed them to Toby to put away. When dinner was cleaned up, Toby and Mary each grabbed one of her hands and dragged her back into the living room. Lenora laughed and put the rented Scooby-Doo movie into the DVD player. Then she sat on the sofa with Toby and Mary on each side of her. They had been watching for 10 minutes before the door opened, and Otto walked in with Jim on his hip. He set Jim on the sofa but didn't sit down. "Lenora, can I speak with you for a moment in the kitchen?" Lenora looked at each of the children and then back up at Otto. "All right." She moved Jim in between Toby and Mary and followed her boyfriend into the kitchen. "Barbara took the brunt of the crash. She's not doing well." Otto whispered to a degree that Lenora could barely hear him. "She was still in surgery when I left with Jim. Jim is terrified." "I bet he is. Has he stopped talking like Toby does?" "No, but he does spontaneously start crying. I just thought I should let you know." Lenora nodded. "You were right. Is there anything I can do?" "I don't think so. Just being there for him is all we can do, at least until Walt calls." Lenora nodded, and they went back into the living room. Lenora picked up Toby and put him on her lap, and Otto put Mary on his lap, and they sandwiched Jim between them. Jim started crying only once. Lenora took her handkerchief back out and wiped his face. He was laughing at the movie before long, and all the kids fell asleep before the movie ended. Otto took Jim and Toby and took them both into Toby's bed. Lenora took Mary up and tucked her into bed. Otto peeked into the bedroom just in time to see Lenora lifting the blankets over his oldest child. She leaned forward and kissed Mary's forehead. Then she set Mary's house shoes on the floor by the bed. "They really like you," he said. "I like them too." Lenora didn't turn around. "I like you." She stood up and turned off the lights, leaving the door open slightly. "So," Otto wrapped his arms around her waist, "what are we going to watch?" "I don't know. What do you have in mind?" "Preferably in English. I'm a little too tired to translate." Otto chuckled and kissed her. "How does that new Lord of the Rings movie sound?" "Isn't it 2 hours long?" Lenora kissed him back. "Is there a problem with that?" Otto and Lenora were watching The Two Towers at midnight when Walter stumbled through the front door. "Walt, what happened?" Walt stumbled forward and collapsed into the lazy boy, eyes distant. "Should he have been driving like that?" Lenora asked as Otto rushed to his brother's side. "Walt? They nearly lost her twice," Walt choked out. "Twice. I don't know what I would do without her, Otto. Oh, pale lady, what would I tell Jim?" Walt, calm down. She's going to be fine now, right?" "She's in recovery?" Otto knelt in front of Walt. Walt nodded mutely. He hid his face in his hands. "Dada?" Jim stood bleary-eyed on the steps. Walt looked up at his son. He stood up and picked up Jim. "Young Atlas." Jim popped his thumb in his mouth and lay his head on Walt's shoulder. I have to get him home." "No, you can stay here. Go, the spare bedroom is clean and set up. Take Jim and go to bed." Walt took a deep breath and nodded. He placed his hand on the back of Jim's head before heading to the guest bedroom. "He won't sleep." Otto shook his head. "Do you want to finish our movie?" Lenora shook her head. "No, it's late. I should be heading home." "All right," Otto agreed. He walked her to the door and wrapped his arms around her one last time. "Or you could stay?" "Otto," Lenora chuckled. "Did you forget that you just put your brother and nephew in your spare bedroom? Which is little more than a pantry, I might note." No, I remember. I just saw it." He blushed and bowed his head. Lenora smiled and kissed him. Walt rubbed his eyes as he followed the smell of coffee into the kitchen. He hadn't been able to sleep a wink. He had just lay there with his son and worried about his wife. "Otto, please tell me you made the good coffee." Is plain Folgers good?" Walt's head snapped up. Lenora was standing in front of him, cup of coffee in hand, Otto's shirt draped around her shoulders. "Oh, when did this start?" "Last night." Lenora handed him the cup in her hands. "It wasn't really planned. It was just so late, and with everything that happened, we just..." Walt actually managed to chuckle. "Well, at least not everything that happened last night was bad." Lenora poured her own coffee and sat at the table with him. "I'm sure Barbara will be fine. I bet she'll even be back in your arms by the end of the week." "I know that. I was just so scared last night. I really don't know what I would do if I lost her." "You would turn to the rest of your family. Otto, Miss Nomura, Barbara's brothers, me. We would all be there. You know that." Walt smiled at her for a moment and took a sip of his coffee. There was a period of silence. "You know, I half expected a lecture from you this morning," Lenora admitted. "A lecture?" Walt looked appalled. "I lived with Barbara for 6 months before I asked her to marry me, and I moved in the night James moved out. We may not have intended that I stay after that first night, but that's how it happened. What kind of lecture were you expecting? Now tell me, Lenora, what exactly are your intentions towards my little brother?" They both burst out laughing, and Walt had to admit, it felt good to laugh after the night he had had. Otto took a deep breath as he peeked at the food in the oven. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to calm down. Toby and Mary seemed unfazed by the evening's plans. Why was he? Before he had time to answer his own question, there was a knock at the door. Lenora let herself in after knocking on the door. Toby and Mary wasted no time greeting their papa's girlfriend. Miss Lenora! Miss Lenora!" they squealed, clinging to her skirt and hugging her legs. "We have something to tell you," Mary sang. "Nicht jetzt!" Otto scrambled from the kitchen in a panicked frenzy to cover his daughter's mouth. "After dinner, Prinzessin, after dinner!" Mary nodded and held up her arms as he picked her up. Lenora stooped to scoop up Toby. "Sorry about that. I promise it will make sense after dinner. So," he kissed her around the kids, "how are Eli and Miranda?" "The usual. Miranda is smothering him, and Eli wanted to come with me tonight, like he always does." Otto nodded. Mary and Toby may have missed the despair in her voice, but he never would. He knew just how much she missed Eli when they were apart. The 5-year-olds were released once more to wash their hands before dinner, as the Hot Wheels track they had been playing with included a slime pit. As dinner drew to a close, Otto felt his anxieties creeping back in. "Is Miss Lenora going to stay the night again?" Toby asked around a mouthful of macaroni and cheese. Otto swallowed thickly. "That would be up to her, Bärchen." "Maybe, Toby. We'll see what happens after dinner." Lenora handed him a napkin. "And don't talk with your mouth full." Toby nodded and wiped his cheeks. As soon as dinner was finished, Mary and Toby led the way to the living room. They bounced and chattered the entire way. Rarely had Otto seen his kids so excited. All right, you two. What's this surprise you have?" Lenora chuckled as she sat on the sofa. Otto licked his lips and put a hand on each of Toby and Mary's shoulders. "Lenora, there's something I've been neglecting to tell you about Toby, Mary, and I." Lenora's smile began to fade. "What?" "None of us are human." There was a beat of silence. "What are you? I thought the kids were adopted." "They are. We are all different species, too." With one more deep breath, Otto transformed into his natural troll form. He then watched as Toby transformed into his Aaarrrgghh form, and Mary summoned a ball of water from the kitchen. The mermaid dropped the water on her head and swiftly grew a tail. Lenora's jaw dropped as she watched. "I am a polymorph changeling. I can turn into anything I wish to be. Mary, as you can see, is a mermaid. And Toby is an Aaarrrgghh. His grandfather came to Earth from a planet called Aaarrrgghh 5. Lenora didn't move for a moment. She simply stared at them all. Then she grinned and stood up. She scooped Mary into her arms and suddenly changed. Her violet turtleneck and skirt were replaced with a sky-blue chiton and an elegant gold cape. No, it wasn't a cape. It was wings. Elegant gold wings. Her black curls were clipped back with thick gold rings. Taking a step forward, she cupped Otto's cheek and kissed him gently. "I love you more than words can yield the matter," she whispered before turning to the little ones. Dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty. Now it was Otto's turn to stare. "You're a fairy?" Mary all but screeched. "Yes." Lenora bit her lip and looked at Otto once more. "I've been meaning to tell you for a few days, but I keep getting interrupted." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "So, can I still stay?" "Stay? Don't you ever think of leaving?" Otto pulled her close and pressed his face into her neck. Lenora's laughter rang in his ears as she curled her face into his neck. Toby wrapped his arms around her knees, and Mary leaned forward to hug Otto's arm. For a moment, they all just stood there. So, was that an invitation to move in? Otto chuckled and nodded. "Oh, one more thing. Frog was not a cat, either." "Oh, that I knew." After they put the kids to bed, Otto and Lenora ventured outside for a late-night walk. Froggle was perfectly capable of watching the little ones for a little while. It's what domesticated goblins were meant to do, after all. Before long, they managed to find their way to the kissing tree. "Ha! I found Walt and Barbara," Lenora tapped the tree. "I think I found my sister and her ex." Otto pointed to a tiny ZN plus DD. "That was a rough one. Do you think you could change one?" "I'm not entirely sure how your powers work." Lenora thought for a moment. "I think I could. I've never tried to. Why?" "Just to help someone." She closed her eyes and placed her hand on the tree. "Okay, which one?" Otto took her hand and guided it to one of the carvings on the tree. "This one." "All right. What do you want it to say?" "Aaarrrgghh." Lenora froze and opened her eyes. Her hand was over her own last name. She turned to look at her boyfriend and found him down on one knee, a black velvet box in hand. "Lenora Janus, will you marry me?" It took her a moment to find her voice. They had talked about getting married, but this was far from how she expected the proposal to go. "Yes!" She flung her arms around his neck and kissed him hard, causing both of them to topple over onto fallen leaves at the base of the tree. It only took Otto and Lenora about 2 months to plan the majority of their wedding. Lenora designed her wedding dress as well as Barbara's bridesmaid dress and Mary's flower girl dress. Walt and Jim baked the cake, and Otto arranged everything for a small dinner reception after the ceremony. "Barbara," Lenora looked up from her sewing machine, "can I ask your advice on something?" "Sure, what did you have in mind?" Barbara didn't look up from the pattern she was cutting. "I want to do something special for Otto. Something in German." This time Barbara did look up. "You know you don't have to. He already adores you. You know that, right?" "Yes, but I want to do something to show him that I love him just as much. I want to say something like, 'That's ridiculous,' or 'You don't have to do that.' But I did my vows in Italian for Walt, and he made extra vows to include Jim, so I have absolutely no room to judge you." Silence fell over them for a moment as they thought, "Hey, you both like musicals, right?" "Yes?" "How familiar are you with Mamma Mia?" As soon as Miranda, Eli, Nomura, and the humans left the reception, the remainder of the wedding party ran down into the canal. It was perfect for a changeling wedding, a simple, calm, human ceremony with a wild, crazy troll reception. The Stricklers were all dressed in deep sapphire that managed to complement both Walt's eyes and Barbara's hair. Toby and Mary were wearing the same burnt orange as Otto's vest. The citizens of Troll Market were already partying when they arrived. Walt laughed, swept Barbara and Jim into his arms, and flew out over the city. Lenora grinned and picked up Toby. She and Toby transformed. Otto chuckled and picked up Mary. With that, she flew out over Heartstone Troll Market. "Shall we catch up, Prinzessin?" Otto asked, putting her up on his shoulders. Mary giggled as he transformed, dropped to all fours, and ran down the crystal staircase. At the party, Otto introduced his new wife to Vendel, and Barbara introduced her to Bagdwella. Toby, Mary, and Jim played with Blinky, Aaarrrgghh, Draal, and Changlings. There were a few traditions from the surface world that Otto and Lenora insisted on bringing down with them, however. Their first dance, dancing with each of their children, and smashing cake in each other's faces, for starters. Not even Jim promising mischief could lure Toby off the dance floor. Mary was ecstatic to show off her dress to anyone and tell them her new mama made it for her. However, it was Eli who started to tire out first. Then the other three were not far behind. "Lenora," Barbara grabbed her arm with a grin, "Blinky and Aaarrrgghh are taking the kids to the library. It's time." Lenora grinned and scurried off with her new sister-in-law. They fiddled with the old music system the trolls were using and got their song playing. Otto felt his heart freeze when the song changed suddenly. Walt snorted and laughed as they identified the song. "Oh, that's right," Walt grinned down at his little brother. "If she and I were in Rome at the same time, that means Lenora is older than you." "Yeah, she's 400 years older. Now that's an age gap," Walt snorted. "Shut up. You're 600 years older than Du bist so heiß, machst mich an." Walt stopped laughing. Otto's jaw dropped like a stone. They both turned around. Barbara skipped up and into her husband's arm. "Did you have anything to do with this, love?" "Only a little." Barbara giggled and kissed him. There was a strange gleam in Lenora's eyes. She sang. The German words rolled off her tongue with surprising accuracy. She marched forward, pushed her new husband down in his chair, and straddled his lap. Barbara attempted to hide her giggles in Walt's vest. Walt tried to hide his laughter in her hair. Otto sat, eyes wide, jaw hanging open. Lenora closed his mouth with the tips of her fingers. Before the song was over, however, Lenora accidentally leaned too far forward and sent the chair toppling back. There was a flash of blue and a clack of stone on stone as Otto shifted forms. "Oof!" Otto finally cracked. He pulled Lenora down and kissed her between the laughs. Lenora lay her head against his chest as she dissolved into laughter. "Oops." Otto and Lenora finally made it home around 2 in the morning. Otto carried Toby, while Lenora carried Mary. Chapter 8. A Fairy and Troll Market. 2 cars pulled into the Arcadia Oaks Canal and under the Arcadia Central Bridge. 4 people got out and looked around for anybody watching them. Otto, Lenora, and Barbara each got out one of the 3 children from the cars, while Walt made his way over with the horngasel to open the portal. The families made their way down the crystal staircase. Otto chuckled as he watched the look on his wife's face. It was Lenora's first trip to Hearthstone Troll Market, and her excitement was made evident by her wide eyes behind her violet glasses. Zaubermaus? Otto reached forward and caught Lenora by the arm. I'm happy that you are excited, but you can look around when we get to the bottom of the stairs. I do not want you and Mary to go tumbling down them. Lenora blushed and shifted the little girl in her arms. Sorry, Bussabar. I'm just so excited. I know, Lenora. Otto shifted Toby to his other hip and kissed his wife. And we can ask Blinky all your questions when we get to the library. Can I go swimming in the lake again, Papa? Mary chirped. Yeah, Jim and Toby began cheering. If you 3 behave, Walt promised. We'll go to the lake when we finish at Uncle Blinky and Uncle Aaarrrgh's. But you lovebirds might want to keep the kissing to a minimum, Barbara joked. You know how Draal feels about kisses. The 2 families shared a laugh at their friend's expense. At the foot of the stairs, Jim, Toby, and Mary were set on the ground and allowed to run forward. Everyone knew not to harm the 3 whelps. Jim shifted into his troll form and Toby into his Aaarrrgghh form as they ran. Otto thought he could hear a slight buzz coming from Lenora as they walked. He knew his wife well enough to know that if he let go of her hand, she would run off into the troll market, and it would take him hours to find her again. The children, at least, knew how to get to Blinky's library and who to ask for help if they got lost. It wasn't long before Lenora started dragging her husband along as she ran past all the different shops, giddy as a schoolgirl. Jim came running back to his parents. Mummy, Daddy, Uncle Changlling, and Draal are here too! Walt scooped his son up onto his shoulders. Are they really, young Atlas? The families entered the library to find Blinky and Changlling talking about some of the ancient books on troll lore. Blinky had his and Aaarrrgh's geode in his lap, as he always did when reading. Aaarrrgghh was resting his head on the table while Mary braided his thick green hair. Draal was participating in a tickle fight with Toby, a tickle fight that was more Draal tickling Toby than Toby tickling Draal. Lenora's eyes grew wide again as she gasped. She darted forward and started running around the trolls. Aaarrrgghh and Draal she had met several times. In fact, Aaarrrgghh would occasionally stay in their basement at the request of Changlling after Walt got back from a bad meeting with the Janus Order. But she had never met Blinky or Changlling themselves. Oh my gosh, she squealed before babbling off in a language that the trolls couldn't understand. An excitable one, I see, Changlling chuckled. Otto shrugged. It's her first time in Troll Market, and she's been out of the magical world for a while. Just give her a moment, she'll calm down. Speaking of which, Walt turned to the troll hunter, I wasn't expecting to see you until after my meeting tonight, Changlling. Oh, the troll hunter looked away. Blinky and I were just discussing, Okay, so it's a book club. Don't tell Vendel. Barbara laughed. Nowhere in the rules does it say that the troll hunter can't have a hobby. That's what I keep trying to tell him, Draal called over, watching a dizzy Jim and Toby stumble around like drunken sailors. Stay out of this, Changlling begged his son. Strickler, why must you and your family insist on encouraging him like this? It's fun to watch you squirm. Walt placed his hands on Jim's shoulders to keep the boy from falling over. And you seriously need to lighten up. Have a little fun once in a while. I have to agree with Strickler, Blinky piped up, shifting his grip on the geode in his lap. Jim shook his head to clear the last of his dizziness. Then he quietly stepped forward and peered at the blue and green stone in his uncle's lap. When will the jod hatch, Uncle Blinky? Geode, Jim, Blinky corrected with a slight chuckle. And it will only be about another 10 years. Jim looked a little disappointed. He leaned forward and whispered to the living stone, I can't wait to meet you, little cousin. Barbara chuckled and looked at Walt. They had considered trying for another baby, but with Walt as a spy, neither of them wanted to introduce a baby into their crazy life just yet. What are me and Toby, then? Mary called from her perch on Aaarrrgh's shoulders. Chopped liver? You 2 don't count as little cousins, Jim insisted. You're only 2 months younger than me, and Toby's only 3 months younger than me. Uncle Blinky and Uncle Aaarrrgh's baby is going to be a baby when we're almost grown-ups. Stop fighting, you 2. Otto ordered, or no lake. Blinky, I hope you do not mind, but... He ushered Lenora, who had finally calmed down, forward. I had a few questions I wanted to ask you, Mr. Aaarrrgghh. Please, just call me Blinky. The blue troll stood up, holding the geode in his lower arms and offering one of his upper hands for a handshake. Ask away, Miss Aaarrrgghh. Lenora is fine. And, are there any fairies in or around Troll Market? I know there are gnomes, but... Fairies? Nonsense, Blinky laughed. The fairies lost the war to the pixies. The library was overtaken by silence. Lenora stared at Blinky in horror. War? When? Over 300 years ago. Blinky handed the geode to Aaarrrgghh and went over to the bookshelves. The fairies were completely wiped out. Lenora sat heavily in the empty chair. Otto hugged her from behind, resting his chin between her poofy pigtails. Lenora clasped her hands around his. That's not possible, she insisted. I saw one 6 years ago, almost to the day, in Italy. Are you sure? Changlings gasped as Blinky began flipping through a book on the fairy pixie war. It could have been a trick of the light. Lenora leaned forward to look at the drawing on the book. Otto released her from the hug, but kept a supportive hand on her shoulder. Lenora burst out laughing. That's not a fairy. That's a fairy-light pixie. Blinky and Changlings exchanged a look. A fairy-light pixie? I've never heard of such a thing. How would you know something like that? Lenora leapt to her feet. Because I'm a fairy. In a flash, Lenora had transformed. Her black curls hung down her back, held in place by golden rings. The loose blue chiton was attached to her wrists with gold bracelets and tied around her waist with a thin gold rope. Transparent, golden wings were folded down on her back, almost as if they were part of her outfit. Everyone's jaws dropped. Everyone, that is, except Otto. How... Changlings couldn't form words. Shakespeare, Walt gasped. Let me guess, you helped Will with a few of his plays, didn't you? Lenora smiled. Miranda and I both helped Billy. I take it you helped him too? Walt started laughing. When was the last time you were in Greece? At the height of the Colosseum's popularity. I couldn't tell you the year. Miranda and I left Greece for Rome about that time. Ah, were you an action figure collector or, perfume collector? Action figures and sandals. You? Action figures. Even back then, the perfume thing was disgusting. How much of it all do you remember? However much of it wasn't replaced with the wine my sister so much adored. Mein Gott, there are 2 of them! Walt and Lenora turned to face their spouses. Otto was leaning playfully on the chair his wife had vacated, and Barbara was doing a teasing impression of the scream. What? I don't get to talk about being there often, Walt defended. Jim tugged on his mother's shirt. Mummy, Draal said he'd take us to the lake. Can we go, please? Barbara smiled and rolled her eyes. How about we all go to the lake? Blinky, Aaarrrgghh, Kenji, you 3 want to join us? Blinky hurried to put away his books, and Aaarrrgghh put their geode back in its nest. Toby happily climbed up on Aaarrrgh's shoulders, and Mary took her mother's hand. Otto grabbed Lenora's other hand. Walt and Barbara swung Jim between them as they walked. Are you coming, Trollhunter? Walt called over his shoulder. Changlings thought for a moment. Well, sunset isn't for another hour. That's when I have to go on patrol. Only because it means I get to throw Draal in the lake. What? Draal began sprinting away from his father. Father, why have you betrayed me? The rest of the family laughed as they made their way to the underground lake. On the way, Walt noticed Bagdwella getting ready to go scavenging. Bagdwella, he called, are you going out tonight? I'd planned on it. Why? The ruby-haired troll asked, her gnome, Nola, scurrying up to her shoulder. Be extra careful tonight, Walt warned. Bular's been in a bad mood lately, and he'll be prowling tonight. Bagdwella smiled a sharp-toothed smile. Thank you, Strickler, but I can take care of myself. Walt rolled his eyes good-naturedly. That's Bagdwella for you. And that's the end of Chapter 8. Please do go leave a comment and a kudos on the original fic, and here's a list of the translations for various German words and phrases used in the past 2 chapters. Note that they might not directly translate the intention of the phrases, but it's what they directly translate to, as I don't speak German, so I don't know the exact intention. Freitag means Friday, Freundin is the feminine version of friend, wunderbar means wonderful, Bist du bereit für deine Schuhe means are you ready for your shoes? I'm not sure if the exact translation is the actual meaning of the phrase. Guten Tag means good day. Mein Junge means my boy. Prinzessin means princess. Zaubermaus means magic mouse. Bussebar means kiss bear. Mein Gott means my God.